And we're live. Dylan and I are stepping in for Will Folks this month as he wraps up a 2-week vacation at the beach. And when I say vacation, that is absolutely in air quotes because I can't even imagine vacationing with 8 kids. So while he is navigating those beach meltdowns, snack negotiations, the rest of us are covering the chaos back here in South Carolina, and June did not disappoint. From a bombshell federal indictment, which is rocking the state house, quashed murder charges down in the low country, gubernatorial race that's already heating up like a low country summer. We have a ton to unpack this month. So let's get into it. Welcome to the FITSNews month in review, which is live, unfiltered, and unhinged. So pray for us all.
Truly independent and unapologetic.
I wonder if Will sweats knowing that we're live without him. I would. I think our biggest story this month by far was the federal indictment of State Representative R.J. May, Republican state representative from Lexington County, former chairman of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, and he was indicted on 10 charges of related to child sexual materials.
What they used to call child pornography.
What they used to call, but it's they still do in court filings. So it's
in the federal statute, it is still child pornography. Yeah. But there is this theory that the pornography is something which is consensually recorded between two people, whereas children can't consent to being in pornography. So that's kind of the reason that they're trying to change the nomenclature. But it's going to take a number of years because they're going to have to revise the federal statute. And so until then, it will just be statutorily inaccurate to not refer to it as child pornography. So we're always kind of straddling the line as members of the media, trying to go between what has been deemed appropriate in our profession and what is statutorily accurate.
Yeah, it's so. This indictment. I think we had reports that it was coming, but I think just still the gravity of it rocked South Carolina. And do you want to give a little background on R.J. May and why this was so shocking to people that follow politics? And
I think I'm a great person to give that background because I live in South Carolina House District 88, which is R.J. May's district. He's the arch conservative of arch conservatives, or he was a co-founding member of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, which is a group that rose to fame and infamy by primarying successfully a number of members of the South Carolina Republican Caucus. Now, the interesting thing about the state of South Carolina is that sometime in the 90s, there was a time where it was politically expedient for a lot of folks who were running as Democrats to switch to running as Republicans. This state used to be controlled by white Democrats. It is now controlled by white Republicans, but those are the same people. And as a lot of people move to South Carolina who are actually truly conservative, who want conservative representation, it creates this massive opportunity for folks to go and say, look, this guy was a Democrat until it was convenient to not be a Democrat. And by the way, there's still plenty of guys in the General Assembly that can be knocked off on these grounds. And R.J. May was the political hitman who would come in. He ran campaigns, so that was his job, was to run people's political campaigns. And he kind of had this group going within the General Assembly once he would get them there, called the Freedom Caucus, where they would go and point to the mainstream GOP and say, you're not cutting taxes enough. You're increasing spending every year on this budget. You're not doing anything that is fiscally conservative. You're not doing things which are socially conservative enough. And so obviously he made a lot of enemies doing that, but that is why he was a highly relevant figure given his relatively low status, officially within the House of Representatives.
Yeah, so this investigation, which we first reported exclusively on last August 2024, that there had been a search warrant executed at his home in Lexington. These charges were particularly shocking given his
extreme social conservatism. One of these people who's bandying on about transgender people and on the moral high horse, which hold your whatever opinions you want. Obviously, I think that stuff with kids has gone too far. But for somebody who's beaten the social conservative drum to then be accused of the most reprehensible crime that one can commit morally, which is just abusing children who have no and he's not accused of directly abusing children, but obviously if you're consuming that kind of material and distributing it, you are creating the demand for this kind of stuff. So it's truly reprehensible. And it was not something where, I think normal people can kind of understand like something on the line of the legal age of consent, but it was very young children. So it's
Right.
it's very hard to understand as somebody who's wired healthily.
Yeah, it was concerning to say the least. So in May we had gotten information from sources that the indictments were imminent, and in June, sure enough, June 11th, he was arrested by federal agents at his home in Lexington County. Now, we had gotten a tip that was happening, and Andy Fancher, thank God, who has taken the lead on the story, he's sicker than a dog this week, so that's not why he's on here, but he's done such a wonderful job on this. Andy's like, should I get in the car and go over there? I was like, yeah, I should.
Andy just had this weird intuition, and this, I think it just comes from doing this job for years like he has, but
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just like, I think that I got to be at this place.
Yeah.
And he followed his intuition, and he shows up at RJ's neighborhood where he's been before because he was over there shortly after they conducted the search warrant. And lo and behold, an armada of unmarked federal government looking SUVs roll up and take RJ into custody.
He's there with his camera taking pictures, which, God bless him. Like that is, I mean, that's a hard position to be, but it is newsworthy. And I think it was important that he was there. And his first hearing was the next day on June 12th, 2025. And that is when the same day the indictment was unsealed in federal court. And that indictment, and there was also a subsequent motion from the feds to deny him bond. So both the indictment and that motion to deny him bond contained details that were just, I can't unread it. I needed to wash my eyes with bleach. It was horrible.
It makes me so angry as a constituent, as somebody who knew him personally. If this stuff holds up in court, and especially as somebody of my profession, I will wait for the government to prove their case in court. Allegations are allegations, but
right.
This stuff, as the federal magistrate, ostensibly impartial person said, there's a serious weight of evidence here. So while I will wait, I will also acknowledge the seriousness of what the government has presented here.
If this happened, if these allegations are true, he was obviously doing this stuff behind people's backs. Like nobody really knew who he was. So they argued he was a danger to the community and held him without bond. So I thought that was super interesting. Andy was in the courtroom. So in federal court, for people who don't know, you cannot have cameras, recording equipment. You have to go in old school style and take notes and describe the hearing, describe what happened in court that day to your audience, which Dylan did a great job of that for the Russell Laffitte trial. But it's a lot of work. It's very different than covering a state trial. And does give you some appreciation for the fact that state courts usually allow cameras in. So they held him without bond, and his Freedom Caucus, their response was interesting. You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so initially after the charges came out, they were very much so, initially after the search warrant was conducted, they were very much so, just like I said, like they wanted the government to prove its case, because at that point, nothing had been officially reported. There wasn't a single court document that was filed, and it wouldn't be filed for months. And this was kind of in this political environment where there was political prosecution going on. I mean, at least that's how they felt about it. That being said, as more evidence came out, because these investigations are conducted by human beings who talk, which is how outlets like ourselves are able to get information. I mean, it's just impossible to keep things completely airtight. It's very difficult to keep, even with feds, the most professional people that you can find. Eventually stuff, especially when it's a high profile case, will. And so they had a statement ready by the time that this thing was imminent, which completely, called for RJ to be removed from the body, let alone the caucus, for him to step down.
So he So after he had a status hearing on this week on, I think it was Monday. I can't remember Tuesday of this week, where he actually was appointed a federal public defender. So he, filled out the paperwork claiming he does not have the assets or finances to afford his own attorney. So he was appointed a federal public defender, and me, like, what do you mean you didn't have the assets? So I did check, and his house has always been in his wife's name. The mortgage is in his wife's name. She bought it before they got married. The only asset I could find in his name was his vehicle. So
And it's very interesting. I mean, that's a weird way to have your finances set up. If you're, I mean, people do whatever they want, but that's certainly not how most married couples will distribute assets. So it's almost like they were ready for a situation like this financially before
from the get-go
it hit the fan, which is, I don't know. I don't really know what to make of that, but it's certainly something worth noting. And it maybe there will be more information which comes out in the future, which we can kind of put together to understand why this was the case. But as of right now, it's certainly strange. But yes, we had heard prior to this motion being filed that this was the way that he was going to go. Once again, just stuff you hear, but it wasn't good enough to report because we hadn't been able to substantiate it enough. But now then you see it in court, and it's like, okay, those sources were right.
Right. And they, when this pretrial hearing, the other bit of information that came out is they are looking to begin trial. Jury selection right now is scheduled for September 10th. So we are looking at just over 2 months. There's going to be a pretrial hearing scheduled on August 20th. And then unless there is a guilty plea in the interim, September 10th is when we are seeing a jury trial, which is crazy fast. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen that happen that fast. Have you, Dylan?
This is new to me. It seems as though, I mean, look, I'm used to the South Carolina court system, which is, you could call it like the molasses court system, and I think it's because I moved here in 2018, and then there was COVID during the point in time when I was in college, and COVID completely shuttered our courts here, and they didn't have the infrastructure to be able to work remotely effectively and move cases. So there's this massive backlog. But I think that the federal system has a lot more resources, a lot more judicial power, so to speak, to be able to get things done in an expedient manner. So I don't know, is this, if by the time the government makes a case of this nature, they have dotted their I's, crossed their T's, usually, although Andrew's been able to find some instances where they did not in this particular instance. But typically, people will make a plea agreement. And I really wonder, although a trial date has been set here, will we see a trial? If RJ, it had been rumored that he was going to work with a high-powered New York defense attorney who has defended high dollar, big profile, high profile clients in the past. And I was thinking when that was on the table, okay, given what they have here, I think that there is totally a way that a guy like that could cast reasonable doubt and win a juror over.
Right.
That being said, a public defender, and these are hardworking attorneys who are trying to do right by folks who have a right to have defense, but who can't afford the aforementioned high dollar attorney. But the reality is that their case loads are a lot higher, and they just aren't able to put the same amount of effort in. So I don't know, like the fact that he's going with a public defender, the fact that he's in the pecuniary situation where that's what he has to do is, I think it greatly increases the chances that we will see a plea deal here instead of this going to trial. Obviously, nobody can force him to take a plea deal. If he wants to take this to trial, he most certainly can. And the public defender will do their best job to cast reasonable doubt. But it's going to be a lift even for an attorney who this is the only case they're focusing on for the time that they're working with you. So it will definitely be a lift for a public defender.
Right. So I mean, right now, what's happening behind the scenes is discovery, where the feds are handing over all of the evidence that they've collected for the public defender to go through and build a defense. So we'll be watching that closely. That pretrial hearing in August should give us a sense of what's going on. Around that time is typically when you start seeing indications in the court, in the docket, that there could possibly be a plea deal coming. So it'll, definitely be interesting to watch. Maybe they will file for an extension or something, or maybe there will be a plea. But yeah, we'll be following this one closely. We've got the upcoming dates on the calendar. Andy. He's like a dog with a bone when he's on a story, which is great. I love that about him. And the fallout politically for RJ May, I think it's a stunning story, stunning downfall.
Yeah, this is one where we were out ahead of the pack, and now things have kind of become more public. And it's kind of like what happened with the Murdoch situation, where we were ahead of the pack because we got the best sources in the state as the thing was in the investigation stage. And now that things are public, this is going to be a much more widely reported story. But as we've continually done here, we've continually kind of maintained. I think we were taking. I mean, by we, I mean Andrew was taking the lead here on pulling apart the documents that have been filed here by the government. And very interesting. There was a Facebook page called Eric Rentling, which the government alleges was a page that RJ May was using to solicit sex from underage prostitutes in South America. And they had said in court, this appears to be RJ May in the profile picture. And it's like Andrew feeds it back into a reverse image search, which is something that takes like 2 seconds to do that anybody can do. And immediately he finds that it's a stock image. So there is definitely stuff there that, like, is that a big deal in the grand scheme of things that they got that wrong? No, but that's the kind of thing where you can say, look, they said this in court. This is demonstrably wrong. If you're a defense attorney, that is your meat and potatoes.
Right.
Because you can, if you can point that and say, if they got this wrong, what else are they getting wrong? So it'll be very interesting to see what else we can find in the future and where this case goes. And it's certainly not going anywhere.
No, not any. Well, sooner than later, but yeah, it's going to be a big story over the next couple of months. And yeah, that was fascinating when Andy found that, because, the Facebook profile is still alive, and he talks about traveling to Medellin, Colombia, and that photo, I'm just like, yeah, it's a reverse image search. Well done, Andy.
Right. Like, does that disprove that the meat of their case there is wrong, that the substance is wrong,
No.
About the whole thing? No. But that's the kind of thing that,
yeah, I mean, defense
we're about to talk about this, another story where there was law enforcement error that has prevented conviction. And maybe the guy in question might not even have any guilt. It's still unclear 10 years later. But it's very important that these law enforcement officials get it right, because when it comes time to prosecute a case, you got to have everything right. So you want to move on to that story at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next story we're talking about is the quashing of the charges against Michael Kluchcci in Berkeley County. So for those unfamiliar with the Michael Kluchcci case, Michael Kluchcci was supposed to stand trial. The trial was beginning 2 weeks ago, I think at the 16th of June. He was accused of murdering his wife, Sarah Lynn Kluchcci, in 2016. So the defense initially, Sarah Kluchcci was found outside. They owned a jewelry store in Berkeley County, had gone out to dinner, and on the way home, she had to use the bathroom. So they pull up to the jewelry store. She goes around back to go in the back door. You have to shimmy through a fence. Michael Kluchcci waits in the car for her, and quite a while later, maybe half an hour or so, I don't know the exact time frame, she isn't back. So he goes to check on her and finds her hanging from the fence from a garden hose. So the initial investigation was done by Berkeley County, and they ruled it a suicide. And the new sheriff, once a new sheriff was elected, called in SLED at the urging of Sarah's father, who strongly believed Michael Kluchcci had murdered his daughter. SLED took over the investigation and ultimately charged Michael Kluchcci with murder. So the first trial occurred in 2018. The defense, went in with that, claiming Sarah died by suicide. The prosecution argued that it was a staged hanging, And that trial ended in a mistrial with a deadlocked jury. So the state was going to bring this back to trial again last year. It was supposed, I think, May or June of last year. And there was scheduling things going on, so they had to reschedule it. It got on the docket again for June of this year. And leading up to the actual jury selection, which was done on Monday, June 16th, there were quite a few motions filed by the defense who they were fighting to, exclude or include certain evidence. But on Friday, before jury selection, they filed a motion to dismiss the charges based on prosecutorial misconduct, stating that they had withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense. So that filing was an absolute bombshell. So they went to court. Monday was jury selection. Tuesday, they heard this motion and did an evidentiary hearing where they called witnesses. And the claim is that the SLED agent, who was the lead, had been told by Sarah Colucci's mother, Barbara Moore, that just 2 weeks before her death, she had a conversation with her daughter where her daughter said, if it wasn't for the kids, I would have hung myself in the garage. And the SLED agent, David Owen, never, and the prosecutor at the time, did not turn that evidence over to the defense. So Circuit Court Judge Roger Young heard all of these arguments, including a very contentious witness, the former prosecutor with the Attorney General's office, Megan Birchstead, and ultimately ruled that the indictments are quashed without prejudice, meaning that they can take this back to a grand jury. He urged them to, if they do take it back to the grand jury, to do it the right way and include all of that evidence. So it was a stunning ruling, I think heartbreaking for Sarah's family, who has been waiting almost 10 years for this trial. It was wild.
Yeah, it's wild, but it's also a piece of evidence that they knew was in the possession of the law enforcement because they were the ones who provided it. That being said, I doubt that they knew that there was this alleged Brady violation.
Right. And, the hearing itself was very interesting about this motion. They called Sarah's mother to the stand, and she testified about what she had told SLED agent David Owen. And they also played video of her initial testimony from the first trial. And Megan Birchstead, the
prosecutor on the first case,
right, for the Attorney General, questioning her and very clearly avoiding, she did not want her to testify about that specific thing. So they're playing that video in court. And it was wild. It was very clear. She said that it was hearsay. So she didn't want Sarah's mother to testify to something that was hearsay that would have elicited an objection from the defense. But there are exceptions to that hearsay rule. And
for folks that don't know, hearsay is like in court, for something to be evidence, it needs to be presented via the rules of evidence. And one of the rules of evidence is that I can't come to court and say, Jennifer told me that XYZ hates Billy Bob. We would need to have the direct evidence of that. But there are situations such as this one, which is called exculpatory evidence, which is basically things that suggest that the defendant is not guilty of the crime as charged, which even if they are hearsay, can still be admitted into evidence.
Right. So, yeah, it was really interesting. And Megan, when Megan Birchstead took the stand, she was salty with the defense, like so much so that Judge Young threatened her with contempt, told her,
it was remarkable. And I used to work at the Attorney General's office briefly after college in their communications department, helping them set up very much like what we have here, like, modern video and audio equipment. But I got, some of these prosecutors, Creighton Waters, Don Zelenka, Megan Birchstead, they obviously are prominent figures within that office, folks who are going to court and doing the work of prosecuting criminals in the state of South Carolina. So I became familiar with them, and I never have seen her act the way remotely at all like she did in court. I don't know what made her decide to act that way, but I think it's going to be damaging for her career because everybody in the South Carolina bar, I guarantee you, watched that clip, and she's just not. That's not what you do if you're going to act like a professional attorney. The way that she handled herself, and folks can watch the clip for themselves. She is like sniping back at the defense attorney, which I get it. He beat you in the first trial. You're mad about that. But there's still a level of decorum which one is expected to uphold when they're in a court of law sitting on the witness stand, especially if they're a member of the bar.
Right. I was stunned watching it. It was hard to watch. You can tell the court staff and the people in the gallery were like, what is happening? It was wild. And it was, the other thing is SLED agent David Owen again took the stand, and if people watch the Murdaugh trial, that is the same lead investigator that handled the Murdaugh investigation. So you would have seen him testify in the Murdaugh trial. And there were quite a few questions that came up regarding his investigation and what he presented to the grand jury in the Murdaugh case. So the defense for Murdaugh, basically said that he withheld evidence regarding the blood spatter from the jury, and that did not play well during the trial. And we're looking at another high profile case where the defense saying he didn't present another huge piece of information to the grand jury. He also didn't present it to the actual jury in the first trial, and it never made its way to the defense. We're seeing a lot of the same players in a lot of these same allegations, which it's hard. It's hard.
You conducted an interview with attorney Lauren Taylor, who, she does criminal law, civil law, but she's also just a member of the bar who knows it's a small legal community in the States. Everybody knows each other. And she was talking about how we see the same names come up time and time again and how it's not okay. I mean, look, everybody in their professional career will make mistakes, especially if you're doing a job where you're doing very, very high stakes work like this. So it's like you're a surgeon or, any small slip of the hands and we've got a massive problem. There's a reason that all the surgeons carry liability insurance and why all the members of the government, in these types of roles are exempted from liability. And that's because it's the only way to operate. So mistakes happen, and we shouldn't, throw the baby out with the bathwater when somebody who's otherwise good at their job and trying to do the right thing makes a mistake. Because if you're in the line of fire, sometimes it's going to happen. But when you see the same person's name come up, story, it certainly raises questions. And I've never directly spoken with Mr. Owen. If he's out there and this makes it back to him, I'm certainly open to speaking with you and understanding your perspective on these things. But looking at it from the outside, it's strange to me that over the course of years of reporting on these kinds of cases, he keeps coming up with these similar circumstances, which are presenting difficulty for prosecutors who then have to go in and clean up the mess.
Yeah. And now what we're looking at is, since they dismiss these charges, if the state chooses to charge it again, they're going to have to bring it to a whole new grand jury. So the question is are they going to do that again? And, what's going to happen? Would they reindict with this additional information? The first jury ended up hung. They could not make a decision. And now we're looking at, evidence that would be presented to the grand jury that, just weeks before death, Sarah had threatened death by suicide by hanging with her mother. So would they get that indictment? How would that play out politically? Because as we'll talk about coming up soon, our Attorney General Alan Wilson is running for governor. And if they can't get a grand jury indictment this time, does that give Michael Colucci? That man has been held, he's been out on bond with an ankle monitor for 10 years. They cut his ankle monitor off in court he's had that thing on for 10 years, says he's got, nerve damage from it. Does he have a civil case? And if they do choose to take it to a grand jury and they don't reindict, does that make that civil case stronger? I think it does.
Oh yeah. If I were him, this is the time to legally go on the offensive. I think the state is likely, just the egos of everybody involved, to give it another crack. I mean, we're the ones paying for it. It doesn't cost them nothing to go
Right.
for it again. But if you can embroil all these law enforcement, because look, he's got a case that a judge is not going to throw out.
Right.
I don't think. I think he's got a case that will last. And we're joined by Erin Parrott, who we're about to. She's our newest member of our staff, but we're about to have a segment with her. But if you're if you're his attorneys, I think that forcing all these people to come in and give depositions, if this case goes to another criminal trial, which will take years, that what you collect in those depositions could be highly valuable to proving his innocence. Or conversely, he will then have to sit for a deposition. So it could cut against him if he actually is guilty, and then in which case he should not file a lawsuit, because that will inevitably, in the course of litigation, expose his position.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see where this goes next. What they choose to do, and what the broader implications are on the judge did say that he didn't find any direct prosecutorial misconduct, but what the broader implications are for South Carolina judicial system, which is already facing so many questions about the integrity of it. I think we need to do better. We need to be more open, transparent, and be able to trust those in charge of the court system, those prosecuting.
Look, if this guy's guilty, let's put him away, but we got to do it the right way.
Right. Exactly. I've always said the same thing about Alex Murdaugh. I think he's where he's supposed to be, but I don't know that they got him there the right way.
Well, we are now joined by the newest member of our team, Erin Parrott. You're a recent graduate of the University of South Carolina School of Journalism. You have been working with us while you were still a student, and now you're actually on staff. You joined the show about a year ago. Mm-hmm. But now that you're a member of staff, it's great. I'm really excited because you just had the natural talent when you were in school. And so now that we've got you here, we will further mold you into the FITSNews ways of Will Folks's esoteric, use of the English language, his use of the M dash, which I know is now a sign of being written by ChatGPT. Let's put on the record, Will has been spazzing out with M dashes all over the place for like the last 15 years.
Before ChatGPT existed.
And, it is like a part of the FITSNews official writing. The AP has a real style book where it's written down. We're working on getting together like a Google Doc. But if you work here for long enough, you start to adopt some of the folksisms. So we'll be getting you into the fold. But there is a story which we've been covering for years at this point, which is the ridiculous levels of crime in Colleton County. And a lot of this stuff is driven by organized crime, peddling drugs and shooting each other up, doing drive-by shootings, just the kind of like senseless violence, which is driven by petty crime and by people trying to make a buck, is a real problem down there. And you jumped on that beat this week with an event which was held in Colleton County to discuss with the public ways in which law enforcement is attempting to deal with this very serious problem. What'd you learn, Erin?
The whole idea of this public event was to really explain how the community needs to work with law enforcement and that they need to unify better together, because that had been a big issue with the public or the community of Colleton not necessarily thinking that law enforcement is doing enough. And so that public event was mainly held to just kind of get the public's concerns, get questions asked and answered with law enforcement, SLED agents, school board, all of that, to try and figure out the best way to tackle all the crime in Colleton and provide updates on what they've done so far.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think the school board has to be wrapped in, but unfortunately, a lot of these people that are doing it, they're either like just turned 18 or they are actually still minors. It's unfortunate that a lot of the people who end up wrapped up in this, you look at who's getting arrested, it's just folks who are not getting their life off to a start by like working a productive job. They I don't know, whatever the things that are going on at home is what's going to solve the problem. The cops can arrest as many people as they want, but if folks are sitting there where they know, oh, I know who did this, but I'm not going to talk about it because that's a member of my community, I mean, look, if that's the attitude the public is going to take, then Colleton County will never improve. The government can only do so much. They need people to step up and step in and help them. And whether that's, having a good household environment for your kids so that the odds of them go into this life are as low as possible, or whether it's people who see something and actually say something, like that's how people are going to get Colleton County to move out of this situation. But unfortunately, I mean, if you've got the money to move, to not put yourself in a position where your house is going to get sprayed by bullets as a result of two other people that are not related to use beef, you're probably going to leave. So it's going to make the situation worse over time for the folks who are still stuck in it.
Yeah, and I mean, and Sheriff Buddy Hill of Colleton, the sheriff's department, even like took the stand, and he reported that there were, so far this year, in the past 6 months of 2025, there's been 18,629 service calls, and 331 of them were gunfire related. Now, he said that it could be like hunter related, could be target practice, it could even be fireworks, but he noted that the sheriff's office is short staffed. They're short 8 officers. But so far, I mean, they've had 146 drug cases this year alone, and then there's been 5 homicides. So like the ongoing crime is a lot. I mean, 18,000 service calls is a bunch, and 331 of gunfire. But I mean, with the drug cases too, that's a big issue also. There's been, like I said, 146 cases opened, and all of the seizures included. I mean, I can give you the stats that he told me if you think that's important, but that's just a lot of crime that's going on. And even some of the residents, when they had the open mic, they took the stand to even criticize the mayor of Walterboro, saying that he's not doing anything. One resident said that he's been sitting in that chair and hasn't done anything. So it was very split. Like, she was met with applause, bashing the mayor basically, but then there was also a lot of residents thanking the sheriff's department for working with them. But the whole thing was like, everyone needs to work together and not turn on each other and not trust law enforcement.
Well, and our Andrew Fancher actually just hopped in the chat there. He says, I can think of a few counties that will never improve. And I have a feeling I know which ones he's talking about, given his reporting beat. But look, people need to work with the law enforcement, and we need the law enforcement, like Andrew's always beating on, to be good cops. Well, let's just assume, and I don't know this for a fact, but let's just assume that they are good cops in Colleton County. Even under the best case scenario, they are facing an uphill battle. Jennifer, you've done reports. I mean, talk about the just volume of shootings that happen there.
It's bad. I mean, I'm in some of the local Facebook groups there, and at least every weekend you hear people like, just heard gunshots down the road. Anybody else hear that? Yep, heard the same thing. Sirens, and it's all gang and drug related. I mean, I think Colleton County's location right on I-95 interstate does not help that situation, because that is a huge drug trafficking corridor. But there's a lot of violence there, and it's sad because it's such a great community. I loved spending time in Walterboro.
Great people,
when we were there.
Beautiful real estate, beautiful natural. The low country of South Carolina is truly beautiful. In Colleton County, it is right where that kind of begins and starts. You start seeing the Spanish moss everywhere, and starting to see that low country vegetation, and the humidity is like 5,000% during the summer, which is that's not actually a plus. But that might be why people are so pissed and shooting each other. But I guess I don't even know how they're leaving the house, to be honest with you. But
it is all gang related, and a lot of it, not all. And it's such a great community. I really would like to see them get that under control at some point, because I know people that live there, and
Andrew's talking crap. Did Sheriff Hill mention the latest arrest of his predecessor? I knew Fancher couldn't say. He was damn near on death's door last night when I spoke with him, but apparently he's watching and tuning in. But honestly, y'all don't want to hear him right now. He sounds like he just smoked every cigarette in the 7-Eleven. Yeah, Sheriff Hill's predecessor was one of the many South Carolina sheriffs to be indicted and face criminal charges. So that's why I say, assuming that we have a sheriff's department which is on the up and up, which is not a safe assumption here in South Carolina, it's still a heavy lift. And so we've got like the aspect of what people can do at their homes. Obviously, the cops are at least publicly buckling down here and trying to do what they can. The other aspect is once they catch these people, we need to make sure that the statutes are being applied as hard and heavy as they can. Because once you prove that you are willing to senselessly shoot somebody over what is like a relatively small amount of money or drugs or some personal beef, we should take you at your word that you are not somebody who is fit to be in a society where people are trying to raise their kids and make money and be productive and not just ruin everything. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of restorative justice type judges who want to give, like I get it. You have a bad background. You grew up in a community where it's tough for you to be successful, but you don't get to drag, at least in my mind, if I'm sitting on a bench, you don't get to drag down the future for this community just because you had a bad upbringing and you chose to be an idiot. Because there's plenty of people who have bad upbringings and choose to not shoot people.
Right. And there's so many times where I'll cover, especially in Colleton County, I'll cover, like a murder. And when I do a background on the person charged with the murder, you will see a history of, drug offenses, assaults and battery, prior shootings, where they weren't.
At what point when you're assaulting people, battering them, shooting at them, you've got to be hit with that 15, 20, 30 buy.
Right.
Because it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to incarcerate you for that period of time. But for the taxpayers, it's better to pay that price than to allow you to kill some people and then have to give you a life.
Right. So, you'll see, and like when I look at these, you'll see, plea deals and the sentences are light and, the initial charge was this and what they ended up pleading to was much lighter. Or you'll see the solicitor, and I see this a lot in 14th Circuit, the solicitor opted not to prosecute. So it's very frustrating. I think that does play a part in what we're seeing with the crime rate, which is sad.
Yeah, and that was a lot of the public's concerns, like in their questions. They said that they just didn't feel like enough was being done for the people that are committing these offenses, which was a big main takeaway. Because the whole idea expressed from the beginning, the whole point of the meeting was to unite the community, but it was the gun violence too, and trying to crack down on that. And even the comments of the live stream from Colleton County Sheriff's Office Facebook page, a lot of the comments were people concerned with that these perps are not being penalized enough.
And was anybody from the solicitor's office there?
I was just going to ask that.
I don't think so, no. They didn't mention it.
That's telling. And that's why this problem continues. The cops are trying to do what they can. People in their houses. We can say you got to do what you can, but realistically, are the kind of people that are perpetuating this thing, are they listening to this broadcast? Let's be honest. They're not.
Right.
So it comes, but okay, the cops are doing what they can. They catch these people again and again and again and again. This is not fishing in the local bass pond where you catch and release. Put them in the cooler. Take them home. By the cooler, I mean the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Because if we want to solve this problem, okay, you prove that you're willing to pistol whip somebody for some drugs, you're going to be willing to shoot somebody in the future as well.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine living here, how frustrating that must be. And especially for the police, when they do make these arrests, they build these cases, they do the investigative work and hand it over to the solicitor's office to charge and ultimately prosecute. I can't, that's got to be frustrating for them too.
And I think there's a lane here there's going to be a stiff competition for attorney general this year. All the statewide elected offices are going to be coming up. So there's going to be a lot of political activity. And that attorney general's race is going to get crowded. Right now we've got Solicitor David Pascoe is in. It's likely that Henry McMaster, our current governor's son, is going to get in, and that McMaster might even badger Trump to endorse him. So he would be a formidable candidate. But I think there's a lane for somebody to go. In these circuits where the prosecutors aren't doing what they need to do, I have the statutory authority as the attorney general to say, I'm taking this case from you, and throw the book at these people. If you could run on that and actually execute it with the current law in this state, you might need to go to the General Assembly and say, I need more resources for the whatever you want to put together, your gang-related enforcement task force or whatever. Like they created the statewide grand jury in the 80s. But you can go in and take cases from solicitor as the attorney general and get the job done if the prosecutors locally are not willing to do it.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of
and the
things
solicitors hate when the AG does that, by the way. There's a huge political disincentive to do that because it's the AG. It makes your life easy when the solicitors are on board with you. But also, the political trade-off might be worth it to piss off all the solicitors if that's what you can use to, in a crowded field, differentiate yourself and get into office.
Right. It's kind of like when the feds take over a case. Like
right. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes to have their turf stepped on, but also a colloquial term, but crap or get off the pot.
Right.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. And I do think, I think that these upcoming these elections, midterm elections in 2026 are going to be interesting in terms of, what platforms our candidates are running on, and the justice system is a big
let's
one.
dismiss Aaron. You don't have to sit through this political drivel here, but Aaron, thank you for joining us. It's true. I'm very excited to have you on the FITSNews team. I think, as you can tell, Andy and I are very excited. Will's very excited. So welcome, and I look forward to seeing you on future month interviews. But
yes, I'm very excited. Got a lot to learn, but that's what I'm doing.
Nah, you started turning out great copy while you were still in school, so
thank you.
It's going to be great. We're going to have a good relationship here. But thanks for joining us. But Eric, Jennifer, let's move on to Alan Wilson, who just announced he's running for governor, the current AG. I was at his launch event at Hudson's Smokehouse in Lexington County, South Carolina, which is not far from where the Attorney General lives, not far from where he currently works. He had probably 250 people crowded into this smokehouse barbecue, South Carolina style, buffet style Southern food restaurant. And it got hot in there, let me tell you, because there was a lot of people in a restaurant that is not meant to have 250 people. They probably were at their fire code capacity with how many people they had in there. But it was a very professionally executed event. You can always tell, when you show up to one of these, if you know what to look for, how well thought out it is. And that it starts with the communication beforehand. They sent out multiple press releases indicating who, what, when, where, and why, giving you some quotes. So and that resulted in a large media attendance from all over the state. And that's because Alan Wilson, I would say right now, is the front runner in this race. The night is still young. There haven't been many polls conducted, but that's tentatively what it looks like right now. And so I show up, you can tell there's this thing called a molt box, which is basically a device which takes the signal from the microphone and distributes it so that all the press can easily plug in. If you show up to a press conference and they don't have one of these, you're like, okay, amateur hour. But every event like this where somebody's running for governor, they certainly should be renting one of these and bringing it out. And they got one of those. They got a stage. They got professional lights. They've got a plethora of elected officials from the county level, the state senators, state house representatives, sheriffs, the kind of donor people who will cut checks, family, friends. Room was packed. And the vibes were good. It's hard to put your finger on it. I've been to political events where of candidates who were going to win, of candidates who were going to lose. And you can tell when a candidate themselves does not believe that they are going to win. I was at Nikki Haley's rally in Beaufort, and look, there was a great crowd there. There was excited people, mostly older people, but that's just Beaufort. But you can just tell by the way that somebody's delivering a speech deep down how they feel. And I could tell that Alan felt like he was South Carolina's next governor, and it felt like everybody else in the room felt that night. Now, will that continue? I don't know. And one of the things that I saw, I uploaded this speech to our YouTube page. And if you look, there's a lot of people who were not happy with Alan in the comments. And I think that this largely is due to Nancy Mace's early bombardment campaign of hitting Alan Wilson, really just the kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks methodology. She's said a lot of things which I think are just baseless. But she has said some things which are demonstrably true, like look at this case of this pedophile who was charged with these charges and received this plea deal, which was negotiated by the AG's office. And I think those are the things that were sticking. And that is interesting because I had actually been looking at these kind of plea deals before this political season started. And it was something that to me is, putting on the investigative journalist hat, I'm like, how the heck is this guy getting cut this plea? Now you can go talk to the prosecutors and they'll say, well, there was this exculpatory evidence and we knew and we didn't want to take it to trial. It was a weak case. So there are reasons why these things happen, but certainly you can look from the outside and if I'm somebody who's putting on my political messaging hat now, not my journalist hat, I mean, this stuff is like a punching bag. You just put on the gloves and lay into it. And certainly there was a lot of folks in the comments. There was a certain amount who supportive of the AG. He's been around. He's a 4-term AG. He's been around for years. But it's certainly interesting to see where folks are going, because I think there's this divide. Like, okay, is Nancy hitting these people who are going to vote in the GOP primary?
Right. And
that's the all important question, because if they're not going to vote in the GOP primary, it doesn't matter too much what
and
they
Nancy
think.
hasn't, right now she's just rumored to be considered, and she has not officially announced that she's going to run, but
and she hasn't done the like behind the scenes thing where you leak everybody your date yet.
Right.
Like it's really truly rumored right now. It's not like, oh, it's going to be on the 26th and she just hasn't sent out the press release yet. Like right now, we really don't know if Nancy's in. And there's other people who are in that status right now, like one of her colleagues in the United States Congress, U.S. Rep. Ralph Norman. He is a Freedom Caucus aligned. Actually, just today, he gave a big interview where he criticized spending increases in Donald Trump's BBB, his big beautiful bill, which he's trying to get. This will kind of be Trump's landmark legislative agenda piece of legislation, which he'll be able to pass. Basically, Donald Trump has to pass things through mechanisms that don't require 60 votes in the Senate, because they don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So it has resulted in this omnibus bill, which of course nobody likes these omnibus bills because they are thousands of pages and they will have things in there that you love and they'll have things in there that you hate, but you're going to have to vote for the things that you hate to get the things that you love. And if you're Donald Trump, really you have to take whatever crap they want to throw in this thing, because it's your only chance to get your legislative agenda across. But it does leave a hole open for folks on the right, Thomas Massey, Ralph Norman, to come in and say, you're spending too much money, because guess what? Look at the bill. They are spending too much money. I mean, the interest payments on our debt already take up a massive amount of our total expenditure. And if we go on this path, we continue on this path where, people say we're going to have to default. America's not going to default. It's going to be exactly what we saw in 2020 with COVID. They're just going to say that there is more money that exists. They don't even have to print it anymore because of the way that money works, but they will just in the ledger book say X more dollars exist. And suddenly everything is 20% more expensive. And, the political demagogues like Joe Biden went out there and said, oh, this is because of the corporate greed. No, it's not. It's because the central banks printed a ton more money. I'm sure some stupid people will buy that argument. But anybody who understands economics is going to understand that they will just increase the money supply. And that will be disastrous for working class Americans, because you're not getting paid anymore. You have to get like 10% raises. I mean, just this year, the US dollar's lost 10% of its value. We're halfway through the year. If this continues, your bank account will be reduced by 1/5 of its purchasing power if you left your money in cash. This is a disaster for regular people. And so I think taking the political position against that, while it is going to incite the wrath of Donald Trump, in the long term will probably prove correct.
Correct. But interesting. It's an interesting choice, because in South Carolina, that Trump endorsement is important.
Oh yeah, they love Trump here. And I don't think Ralph thinks that he's going to get the endorsement, because he has been the thorn on Trump's side for damn near the whole time Trump has been in office. Okay. So I think Ralph knows he's not going to get it. So at that point, why not just say what you think? Because it's going to be between Nancy and Pamela Yvette, because Pamela Yvette, being connected to Henry McMaster, is kind of in with Trump world. McMaster was the first statewide elected official in South Carolina to back Trump, which is why he was fabulously rewarded with the governor's mansion. That's the only thing he wanted. He asked for it. He got it. That's why Nikki Haley became the UN ambassador. Trump didn't have any love for Nikki Haley, and she proved why throughout her term there, working for him, and subsequently. But he needed to reward McMaster. And Trump is proven time and time again that he rewards those who are loyal to him. So that certainly could work out in Pam's favor. If we don't know if that's enough pull, if Henry will even make the phone call for Pam and ask if his own son is in the race. His ask might be, give my son the AG endorsement instead of give Pam the governor endorsement.
So right now, the
But
governor's field we're looking at officially who's in is Alan Wilson and Josh Kimbrell, is senator out of Spartanburg, just announced the same day Alan Wilson
state
did
senator.
state senator, that he would be running for governor. His announcement was a little bit different than Alan Wilson's.
Well, yeah, his announcement was done despite Alan Wilson, because when Alan Wilson announced when he would be holding his event, Kimbrell's team sent out a press release saying, I'm running for governor. And they did it like hours before. So he got a series of headlines like first gubernatorial candidate announces Josh Kimbrell type thing. I do think it's kind of, while the move was like pithy and, a real F you to Alan's team, it's like you just lost the ability to have a rollout like Alan did, where I was talking about this professional event where the media from the whole state shows up.
You get all, you got all your shots you can use for the, the duration of the campaign. You got, you got all these photos and
you get to tell the story of who you are and why you're running. And that's what Alan did in his speech. Folks can watch it in its entirety on our YouTube page if they're so inclined. But he lost that opportunity.
Right.
He got a hit in on Alan, but at what cost? I don't know. I don't know if that will prove to be. And also now you've just pissed off Alan Wilson. He's a bridge builder. He's a fence mender, but that's now a bridge that's going to have to be rebuilt and a fence that's going to have to be mended in the event that Kimbrell remains a state senator and Alan becomes the governor, which is not an entirely unlikely course of events.
Right.
So it was an interesting choice, certainly, but he's in the race. Alan Wilson is in the race. Lieutenant Governor Pamela Vett is doing everything that one would do if they are about to enter the race, as is Low Country Congresswoman Nancy Mace and Congressman Ralph Norman.
Right.
So that's kind of our projected field right now. There's also this kind of idea that's floating around that some outside rich guy could jump in and try. We've seen like John Warren got very close to beating Governor McMaster. He was and still is a wealthy businessman, upstate businessman, who I think would have certainly taken South Carolina more in like the Mark Sanford kind of gubernatorial direction than Henry McMaster, who is, he's not had a very firm grip on the wheel. He's not really used the bully pulpit to try to get an agenda across. He's obviously done a bunch of these economic development deals, some of which have turned out quite poorly, as we've reported on. But there is the place in this race for somebody with deep pockets to come in and disrupt the field and kind of change the dynamics. But right now, Alan Wilson, as far as the folks who are in, which is just 2 at this point, but he's certainly got the name recognition advantage, and he was certainly running a little bit more serious of a rollout of his campaign.
Right. Yeah. So I me, I like politics make me, I'm just not into it, but I'm not going to lie. This upcoming election has me interested. The from the governor's race, the AG race, and we're going to have Spartanburg sheriffs coming up. We got that election to replace former Sheriff Chuck Wright. There's a lot of elections that I am watching and I find very interesting.
Yeah. And I can't, we'll have Andrew Fancher back to talk about that Spartanburg sheriff's election. But one thing I want to emphasize for folks who are thinking about running for office, so this might make it back to, we don't have time to write stories about every county level election or even every state house seat. But these things are really important. We talk all the time about the trouble that these elected officials will get into when the people put the wrong person in office. And if you think you're the right person to be in office, we would love to host a guest column from you on FITSNews where you explain why, or have one of your supporters explain why, because we want to be this public square in South Carolina that helps the public come, make the best choices and put the best people in office possible, because that is one of the best long-term ways that we can fight a lot of the problems which we speak about regularly on this platform. So if you think you're the person, we've got a page on our website which you can go to submit a guest column, get in contact. I mean, if you want to email me directly, DylanDylan@FITSNews.com. I will facilitate the publication of any of these political pieces and make sure they get up in a timely manner and walk you through the process. But this is going to be a very busy election season. We're going to have a lot of statewide races. We're going to have a lot of sheriff's races. There's going to be a lot of contested House seats, even some Senate seats, which might get interesting. So we don't want any of these local elections to fall through the cracks when we're busy covering all this other stuff. So folks that are interested in those races, figure out who you support and why, write it down in an elegant way and send it to us, and we'll be happy to put it up.
100%. I think the last story that we were going to talk about this month that was big, it's another political story, was the legislative pay raise in the state house this month and the subsequent lawsuit. And you've been following that very closely. So basically, our state lawmakers this legislative period voted to give themselves a 400% pay raise. Is that right?
I haven't done the math, but that would check out. But legislators in South Carolina make very little amount of money, and that's prescribed in the statute. And most of these people are independently wealthy, so it doesn't really matter to them. Like, it's, you put a dollar in John D. Rockefeller's pocket, he doesn't really care very much. But the idea from the folks who sponsored this legislation, and it is an idea that I think in principle makes sense, is that if we want to have a General Assembly that's not, 80%, not 80%, but a large percent of these guys are just wealthy lawyers because they've got an excuse where they don't have to go to work for half the year because they can go to court and say, look, we're the General Assemblies in session.
Legislative immunity.
Right. And they don't have to go to court. 6 months. So that already puts them at a huge advantage. And I think there's massive arguments to be made that needs to go away just so that this cabal stops having an inappropriate level of influence, which we talk about. Why do these criminals keep getting put back on the street? Maybe because the people writing and enforcing the laws all have a financial interest in keeping these, merry-go-round of criminals constantly moving, where, once they're in the slammer, there's not nearly as many attorney fees to be generated. Seriously, I wish that this was not just like a cynical, stupid take, but honestly, it does seem that is the way that some people think. But reducing, so taking away that privilege would be one thing. But another thing you can do is pay people more so that people who have other means of funding their lives, other professionals, could justify financially coming to Columbia. Because let's think about it. If you're living in, most of the state is not commutable to Columbia, South Carolina, easily at least. And these lawmakers have to be there early. They have to stay there late. And oftentimes they then have to go to events after the session or choose to go to events after the session where you're oftentimes imbibing alcohol because, you're at a social event, a dinner. Nobody wants to drive an hour back home at 11 after having 2 glasses of wine. And so they all end up renting houses or apartments, not all, but many of them end up renting houses, renting apartments in Columbia. And you look at how much it would cost to do that. Oftentimes, like their pay, that would be all their pay would just go into renting a place. So I certainly sympathize with why they want to make more money. I mean, just look, I just told you, the dollar lost 10% of its value this year already.
Right.
Things cost more than when they wrote that statute. So I'm completely open to the idea that this is a reasonable way to make serving in the legislature affordable for people who aren't a member of the USC Law School Citadel,
alumni
elite gang, which currently runs the state. Graduates of USC Law School, if you want to be in power in South Carolina, and you're a young person, go to USC School of Law. That's your easiest. You go Citadel USC School of Law, you're in. But if we want to have some vote, and there's nothing wrong with that. God bless those people. These people do a lot of great work in our state, but that's just the reality. But if we want it to be an even playing field, and I have no problem with these people being in power, but I just want it to be an even playing field so that, say you're a guy who owns a successful roofing business and you think that you would be a great state representative, right now you're looking at taking a massive financial hit to go serve in office. All that being said, there's great arguments for doing this. And probably it should be accompanied with ethics reform, which makes sure that these guys aren't on the take from lobbying groups or, all the million shady ways which these guys are back-channeled money to do things politically. Obviously, it needs to go along with reforms to make sure that they're not just corrupt. But the problem is not the idea of a pay raise. I can get on board with that. I think any rational person can probably get on board with that. The problem is that the Constitution, and this is the case in many states, political subdivisions, at federal, you can't, if you're voted into office, you can't get into office and then vote yourself a pay raise and immediately receive it. Basically, you have to write it such that it's the next group of legislators. So the voters get to decide, I think you're worthy of this raise that you've given yourself.
Okay, that makes
and that's
sense.
the central problem here. And our Constitution's very clear in saying that the per diem pay cannot be increased within the session.
So they would have to vote to increase it for the next session.
And then wait, because they would have, the sessions are divided in South Carolina. So they would have to wait. They wouldn't get it immediately. But then the next session it would kick in, assuming that they were reelected into office. The way that they wrote it, though, they attached it to the state budget so that it would be distributed at the beginning of the next fiscal year, which is the beginning of next month. And so that is why the Supreme Court took the case. They wanted the briefs in record time. Usually this is kind of a process that, as we said, the molasses judicial process.
So Senator Wes Clymer and Attorney
I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of
Dick
myself.
Yeah,
yes.
They filed a lawsuit objecting to it. And
on the grounds which I just said, which is that the Constitution precludes this move.
Right. So that was filed. The Supreme Court took that on and ruled in record time. Like, holy cow.
And I had spoken with former Senator Harpootlian about this after the press conference. This was something that they expected. When they asked for the briefs in record time, they knew that this court wanted to get something done before the fiscal year, because then the treasurer starts distributing this money to everybody. And then if the case goes the other way, they've got to deal with clawing back the money, which is just a massive mess that they don't want to deal with. So they went in and they did not decide the case, but they put a temporary decision in place so that this money will not be distributed, which indicates that there is certainly substance in the eyes of these Supreme Court justices in the legal arguments made by Senator Clymer. So this case will receive a full hearing where they'll give oral briefs before the court, and then they'll make a decision. But for now, this money is not going to be distributed, and that's a big win for Senator Clymer and for the other members of the General Assembly who publicly voiced their opposition to this. And I think it's kind of a win. If you look at common sense, if you look at the Constitution, I think that while they are in the budget calling this money allowance money, there's a big difference between what something is called and what it in fact is when you look at it in reality. And there was actually already money, which it looks like will now not be distributed. They're actually decreased their pay because there was another pot of money which fell into the same category, which they now won't be able to distribute either. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot here by going for the quick cash grab, because they will now see a net cash reduction. Yeah, and I don't know. It's one of these things where it's like, I mean, as we talk about, most of these folks in the general, not most, but a lot of these committee chairs, high-level people in the General Assembly are attorneys. They've got smart staff attorneys. They've got smart staff. So clearly they thought that this was going to stand and not be a problem. Or maybe they just thought that they had the political muscle that nobody would have the stones to challenge it.
Right.
But if you're a guy like Wes Clymer, where you're sitting looking around and you're going, the guy who's the congressman for my district is talking about running for governor. Maybe it's a good time to get some good press out there, win a lawsuit against my fellow lawmakers. Because guess what? In politics, one of the most powerful things you can do, left or right, is to run against your own party, is to call out your own colleagues as corrupt, and I'm the change. And he gets to have this moment because this is an easy shot to line up and take and make, because they put their heads on the chopping block here. And so it seems that, early returns are good here for Senator Clymer as far as this being a wise political bet. And so he's an astute guy. He's one of the smartest guys in the General Assembly. Yeah. And it does not surprise me that he is capitalizing on this opportunity.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting battle to watch. You just made it make sense to me. Thanks.
Well, and this guy is cerebral, because they were trying to get him at this press conference to go into the political pros and cons. He knows politically, there's a valid argument, the one that I articulated at the beginning of this segment, for doing this. But he stuck to the point where he will win, which is the Constitution. Right. Because it's pretty clear. And there was another case in 1948, which was a similar case where the legislators trying to raise the pay lost, because there were very similar arguments, which was basically, you guys are trying to violate the Constitution by doing a de facto per diem raise through a backdoor.
Right.
So, obviously there's been a complete turnover in personnel on the court since 1948, but that's indicative of the way that this might end up being litigated once it goes before the full court. So obviously this thing is not over, but it's a very interesting political issue. It's interesting to see the way that the senator is leveraging this. But I've enjoyed reporting on it because this is the kind of thing that gets people fired up.
Yeah,
it gets people hot and bothered. And you know, I don't think that the people who introduced it in the Senate were trying to like pull a fast one. I don't know, maybe they were. But I heard the arguments for this at the time where they were doing it, and I didn't realize the constitutional implications. I was going, yeah, sure, pay yourself more. It seems reasonable to me. I don't care. There's relative to the total budget expenditure of the state, this is not a large amount of money, and I think that there's valid arguments to do it. And I think that it will be done in the future legally, assuming that this ends up getting struck down, which I don't know. It's not looking great for it at this point, given the fact that the Supreme Court stayed it.
Right.
But it's kind of all falling apart. And it's interesting to see that the folks who backed it politically have been pretty quiet, which I think is also telling.
Yeah, I think so too.
They're not getting out there and standing in front of the freight train.
We should get this raise, and it's constitutionally legal. No, you're not hearing that.
They make their arguments in court,
right? Which
is where it matters to make them. And I went through the filings and I read them and I understand their arguments. And I think there's some validity to that too. But we're just going to see which way the court rules. But nobody wants to stand in front of a political freight train. Nobody is stupid enough to do that, because there's no winning scenario where trying to take this one to the public and win in the court of public opinion for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was June. It was a wild month. And Will should be back in the office next week.
This is now 2 months of live streams sans Will.
I know. It is really, I feel like he might be scheduling this to avoid him.
No,
not Will.
No. I mean, seriously, though, I think he's looking forward to being back. I can tell you that when he's at the beach every year, he's just worried about his children getting incinerated and drowning, because there's so many of them that they apply sunscreen with a paint gun. They go get an air compressor and put a bunch of copper tone in one of those and just kind of hose them down.
It must just be mass chaos. I can't even imagine. I mean,
I think he's coming back a day earlier. We wouldn't expect him to be around until tomorrow, and I think he might even be in the office right now. So, God bless him. We'll be happy to have him back.
Yeah, definitely. But we thank everybody for joining us this month. Make sure, if you're not following us on social media, you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Also, if you love our news, our reporting, make sure you subscribe to FITSNews.com. I can't remember what it is a month, but it is not a ton of money, and it helps support all of the work that we do, all of that deep dive reporting that you love. So yeah, make sure you head on over to FITS News and subscribe.
Bye, everybody.